Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name is Meg Alexander. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am incredibly excited to get to host today's event. I'm going to get to be talking with Nora Fraser. We're going to be discussing inclusion at work, unlocking team potential through inclusive leadership. We're going to discover about how we can share actionable strategies to help advance inclusion and empower all voices. Now, I'm especially excited to introduce you to our guest speaker today. Now, Nora Fraser is an award-winning social entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of the Multicultural Professional Network, or MPN. Now, she has a career spanning top-tier organizations and extensive experience across both private and public sectors. Nora has implemented key diversity and inclusion programs for global organizations across Australia, Europe, and the UK. Nora's achievements include the Business for Good National Game Changer Award. She was also a finalist in the CEO Magazine's Executive of the Year Awards for nonprofits. She has also received the Global Recognition Award for her outstanding contributions to advancing meaningful social impact. Nora, I'm incredibly excited to get to chat with you again today. Is there anything else you'd like our audience members to know about you before we dive in?
No, thank you, Meg. So good to see you again. I'm super excited to be here for another summit, and all of your summits are always great to discuss kind of practical strategies for inclusive leadership. I probably like to say I am based in Brisbane, Australia, so a different time zone. So I'll probably like to acknowledge the land that we're meeting on today, which is the Turrbal and Yagara people, and pay my respects to elders, both past, present, and future. And I know we've got people joining us globally. So also like to acknowledge all the lands that everyone is joining us from today. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I love that. I like to do a land acknowledgement for my chats too. I'm coming to you from Toledo, Ohio. This is land that belonged to the Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes in my area. So thank you for reminding me, Nora. I love that.
Nice. Thank
All right.
you.
So to dive in on our topic today, inclusive leadership is something that I feel like can be very important depending on what facet of business you sit in or depending on who you are as an individual. How do you think inclusive leadership directly impacts things like team performance and innovation, not just the individual?
That's a really good question. A lot of the time, before I try to dive into the concept of inclusive leadership, I think I always like to take a step back to talk about what diversity is, because some people might not be aware or are joining us on this live stream. Um, it refers to the mix of people that you actually have within an organization. So you're talking about the differences between the people and how they identify. I think how they identify is actually pretty critical when you're talking about diversity. So you, for example, couldn't tell me how I identify, right? It has to come from me as an individual. Then we start to look at the concept of inclusion when you've got a diversity of people that could be at different ages, at different cultural backgrounds, genders, where they feel valued and respected. They have access to opportunities, they've got resources, they contribute in their perspectives and talents, and they're using that to kind of improve the organization. So you have that concept of inclusion. My quote that I really love, there's Venna Myers, and she's a really amazing leading diversity and inclusion expert. And she talks about diversity has been invited to the party. Inclusion, you're asking me to dance, but I love to talk about one step to that, which is you invite me to a party, you ask me to dance, but are you asking for my input into the playlist that you're going to play? And am I able to dance anyhow I like at this party? So I just don't want you to invite me somewhere. I want you to be able to accept me to be in that space and expect me to be who I am as well. So when you think of all these concepts within the workplace, and we start to talk about inclusive leadership, this is where I have a leadership style that I'm focusing on. I'm going to create an environment where all of my team members are working for me. It doesn't matter what background they are, it doesn't matter what their identity is. They feel accepted, they feel valued within my team, they feel supported. And I'm being really intentional about that in terms of I'm going to leverage that diverse workforce to improve the organization that I'm working in. And we hear a lot about culture. Culture is one of the things that you absolutely cannot replicate within an organization. That what makes all of these organizations successful. It doesn't matter if you have the best strategies. And the reset tells us time and time again, I'm not going to go through them, that, inclusive teams are, creative, more innovative. You're going to have higher team performance. And obviously, the best teams are the most diverse teams. I also think about Brisbane, like we're going to have the Olympics here. What an amazing celebration of achievement. We're going to have every single country celebrating their achievements in an Olympic stage. Now, an inclusive leader is really thinking about, I have a team. I'm going to create psychological safety because I'm doing all these things. The people within my team, they feel respected, they feel heard, they feel values. Now, all of those diverse perspectives are coming together to solve problems. The problems are a bit more creatively solved as a team. You've got all of the amazing benefits of that, of include having an inclusive team. You've got reduced turnover. You're intentionally including all voices. So doing all of those things obviously is going to unlock all of the hidden potential you've got in your team, and it's obviously going to drive your measurable business outcomes as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I want to dive in further on something you just said. You said, an inclusive leader is really going to want to be empowering all of the voices within their team. What practical strategies can people in leadership roles use to do this? Because we all know it's not just as simple as saying like who's got questions and giving the space to speak up. Some people need a little bit more encouragement or a little more direction. So what practical strategies can people take if they are trying to encourage this equal empowerment for people's voices, but maybe they're just not seeing results or people aren't really taking them up on it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think I just spoke about psychological safety, and you kind of hear that a lot. The reason why that comes up a lot is if you feel safe within the team and you feel like I've got equitable participation across the team, you're feeling included within the team, right? And how you kind of design your team interactions, and I think great question, in terms of voices, is very important. So being intentional of how you're doing some of those things. I think of some examples like how you're even designing your meetings. It could be something that simple. And I know in meetings I've been in, there's a lot of people where you have the more vocal participants and they will dominate the whole meeting. But a good inclusive leader would kind of notice that and think, how do I make sure all voices are heard within these meetings? And there's a few kind of techniques that you can think about. One of the things is kind of rotating who's facilitating or leading that meeting. It's very simple. So that's one simple practical tip you can do. You are doing kind of a round robin format, giving every person a turn to speak, making sure the quieter people aren't drowned out by kind of like the dominant voices within that team meeting. Um, and sometimes people are different, so I'm a bit more of a reflector, even though I do like to talk. However, I've noticed in some meetings where or I've had someone just say anything, but you can't just say anything. It's about you have to really be intentional to facilitate that everyone's actually speaking and actually actively contributing as well. The other thing that sometimes people miss is really thinking about who's the underrepresented voice in my team and being intentional to inviting them to actually speak on really key topics. For the reflectors like me, I love an agenda. It really helps me to think about, oh, what's coming up. I can think about what's coming up and I can process and think about the meeting that's coming up. Um, the amazing things like Slido, Mentimeter, they're great tools, but they actually do something which is interesting. It lowers the barriers. If you've got team members that actually are introverted, that's what that does. And they worry about if I say anything or this idea is going to land wrong. When you do things like that, it will lower the barriers for them to be able to kind of, contribute as well. That's one very small tweak that you can do. Or just asking people like, what am I missing? Um, when ideas are dismissed, coming back to the idea, making sure actually no ideas is dismissed within your meetings, crediting people for the ideas. And it's just stopping to think to say, a good example, Meg's made a great point about X. What does everybody think about this? How does it impact what we're going to do? And I think when I think about actively listening, so there's a difference between actively listening and just hearing, right? It's quite different. So you're thinking about how am I creating structured opportunities for everybody to contribute within this team, right? And how am I thinking about people who are especially underrepresented within my team? How am I connecting them to projects? How am I connecting them to mentors? Are you even tracking who's participating in your meetings? How are you making decisions? Is that collectively? So you have to think about opportunities are ensuring that is equitable across the whole team. So everyone's got that opportunity. Every voice is empowered. And maybe the last thing to touch on is just diverse contributions and doing that publicly. And also that cultural recognition is always really important around, the whole team's come up with this amazing idea and that's allowed us to kind of solve something. So those little things are what I can think of. Hopefully that
Yeah.
helps.
No, that sounds great. 'Cause, I mean, you're also a bunch of the things that you suggested would help to underscore or help drive home that idea of psychological safety of like you don't need to worry about if the idea is going to land right. We just need to get stuff on the paper, or we're just trying to spit blah. But I love, like you said, changing up the who leads each meeting. If it's always the same format, then who leads it shouldn't really matter or shouldn't like cause problems or anything. Also love the idea of sending out like a what am I trying to think of? An agenda. I
And
kept
then,
thinking of
yeah.
menu. And, sending out an agenda for the meeting, or like here's the topics we're going to be talking about. I also had a manager who asked, if people like wanted to take notes, we could like send him our notes instead of raising our hands in a meeting if people weren't into that. Clearly, I am never one of the ones that doesn't raise my hand, but for everybody else, I think it was super helpful because that way, if you are more of a visual thinker, that way you're like, or if you're like me, a verbal processor, like you could kind of gather your thoughts and be able to send those out later, so you're not so dependent on like that in the moment performance in front of people, blah blah blah. So I think that's great. I love these ideas.
Thanks, Meg.
um all right, so okay, one of the things that we have learned obviously is that if you're going to try and grow your business, you need to be doing so intentionally, otherwise you kind of don't know what you're going to grow into. Do you think that there are ways for organizations to intentionally support women in leadership and women-owned businesses to help drive growth?
Yes, yes, I think so. It's been very interesting. I love that question because when we think about broader marketplace, I actually probably sit in that bucket in terms of women-owned businesses. There's still barriers, and that's things like a sex in finance, marketplaces that you kind of need to succeed. And it's probably when you're talking about women that look like me, even more harder in terms of that access to finance within the marketplace. And when I was looking at some stats, it's really interesting. Like 1% of kind of public and private procurement spend, that's all with women or own businesses are actually receiving. And yeah, I know, right? I was like, what? So there seems to be this emerging interest in supporting women entrepreneurs and through things like what I think I've heard about gender bonds, gender lens impact funds, but they're still limited and they're still underutilized. And I think this is tapping into the potential is an amazing and a powerful opportunity that we can improve kind of women's economic empowerment. So businesses definitely have that critical role to play when you're thinking about how we've been intentional to drive this and create that inclusive economies by using women in leadership and women-owned businesses. I might try and split your question a bit, if that's okay. So I might maybe touch on the women in leadership first within organizations and some of the things they can do. So we're talking about pipeline of female talent and what your kind of internal strategies are towards that. The one thing I'm a big advocate for is the move to active sponsorship. So there's mentorship programs that happen all the time. They are useful, but if they're not backed up with sponsorship, I find sometimes it doesn't really give that next step for the talent within the organization. And what I mean with sponsorship is making sure you're advocating for promotion and career opportunities. That one person who could actually put your name forward in those rooms that you might not be able to get into, I think is quite critical in terms of that women in leadership within organizations. The other thing is the inclusive leadership training. I think we talked about inclusive leadership. What even is it? And some leaders might struggle. What do I need to do? How can I be making sure I'm intentional with my team and making sure I'm mitigating anything like bias in that my recruitment and performance evaluation? I think that's really helps as well. Flexible work is a big one. There's still a lot of organizations that is still not the norm. So I think even that tweak for an organization to just make it the norm, how do we redesign roles that enables flexible and hybrid work? And that's across all levels, even at the highest level of organization. There was one organization the other day that's starting to think, oh, at the highest level, of course we could job share. Of course she could come back to work 2 days a week as as an executive. But it's something that they just hadn't thought of. Like this role is full time. It's always been full time. So and that made a difference in terms of that person coming back and carrying on that career trajectory because they've just had kind of a life transition such as parenthood. The pay parity, there's which year in Australia with the pay gap transparency, if you're constantly just auditing that, it will tell you and identify where there might be some things resolved around gender pay gap, and which kind of helps you to attract and retain top female talent as well. So those are the core things when I really think about the little things organizations can do and think about women in leadership and that talent pipeline. And then I'm going to go into women-owned businesses. Um, Organizations could do a lot here. Things like they've got purchasing power to be able to use that to drive growth and innovation. I hear supplier diversity programs a lot, right? But how is that being implemented? And back to what you said, Meg, are you being intentional as an organization to include women businesses into the supply chain? And even doing that will provide you with a competitive advantage, right? When we even look at what the figures are saying. Targeted procurement spend is another one. So are we kind of setting measurable target? Do we have proportion of goods that we're going to purchase from women-led enterprises? And this is something that we've embedded within our organization. Is that something for us to think about? And there are platforms that you can look at. So there's women-owned businesses and supplier networks. There is We Connect International, where they've got certified women businesses that are there for commercial tenders, right? The other thing I find is capacity building. So providing resources, tender readiness workshops, events, and trying to kind of bridge the gap because the reason why the gap is there is there's a combination of systemic and structural barriers, right? And it's about competing on the equal terms within that government and corporate supply chains. So if you're intentional as an organization, you start thinking, how do I be intentional to try and break down some of this? I mean, you're not going to be able to do everything, but just those little things around how you can kind of help and support women businesses are actually helpful. And 30, I think it's about 34.8% the last time I checked of Australian businesses are actually led by women. And then when you go to that less than 1% of the global procurement market, and then when you start to break that down, and I really don't want to go into the stats to say, okay, let's start to think about intersectionality here and the women that look like me, that then you start to see even more of a bigger barriers. And I think
Mhm.
some of the gaps that we see exist, the pre-tender stage is a big one. So I didn't even know the opportunity was there in the first place. So I can't even apply for it. The tender writing stage might not have the resources to kind of hire specialist proposal writers. And I think there's a lot some of the governments have been doing around having policies that support this and having targets, having resource hub that's specifically designed so women-owned businesses can enter that supplier chain. Um, so if I was to summarize, I think with the women in leadership part, the core one I think that really shifts the dial is that embedding the sponsorship programs. I see that work a lot and the leadership pipelines, and you're doing that intentionally for women. For the women-owned businesses, the procurement policies should actually intentionally include women-owned businesses and start to look at it as strategic, innovative partners as opposed to, oh, we just got a target to meet, right? So, how do we get women access to the networks, to the capital, to the sponsorship? I think those three things are what we kind of move the dial to kind of shift into kind of growth and innovation. Hopefully that
Yeah.
answers your question, Meg.
Heck yes, yes. More than answers, honestly. I think that's really good. And I love the kind of two-prong approach of like, here's what you could do. with the women inside your own organization. And if you don't have, wiggle room for hiring more people or promoting or whatever, then, this is also something you do externally from the business. I think that's excellent. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. All right. What are some common challenges that can prevent inclusion from thriving in the workplace? The one that comes to mind for me is the refrain you always hear of, "That's not how we do that here."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. I was just like, how long do you have?
Sing me the song one more time because we're not going to hear it again. We're changing everything. Yay!
I know. Oh, this one I could do. And I'm mindful of times I'll try my best to talk as quickly and as clear as I can. But there is a lot, or maybe I'll just pick a couple, right? The biggest one is definitely bias that we see. And that tokenism is another one that I really want to talk to as well, because that comes up a lot. Um, there is a lot of when I think about bias and what's ingrained within organizations, sometimes often around kind of gender or race, influencing the decision makings and hiring and promotions, right? And people not really thinking about how am I objective through those processes. Um, and again, when I'm thinking about mitigating some of that bias, things like the having a diverse interview panel, making sure you're aware of your biases and making sure they're not impacting decisions that you're making. Those are some of the things there. And standardizing recruitment processes, so like the blind resume screening, to make sure that you're really looking at candidates purely on merit. So that's the bit around your recruitment hiring pipeline as well. This safe space is another one for your ERGs, where allowing people to share their lived experiences and regular training, right? So there's some of the things that can help to support some of those challenges. Now, I want to talk about tokenism because this I see this a lot where it's almost an organization trying to portray an image of diversity, right? But really, um, they're not really committed to it. And I think it was established by Rosabeth Kanter. There's a good definition that I love. It says artificial appearance achieved by including a limited number of people in a minority group because of their characteristics. Um, and there's some really good signs when you look at this to watch out for, where you've got plenty of diversity in entry-level positions, but none in leadership or management positions. The second one is just high resignation rate. And that high resignation rate happens especially among underrepresented group. So why that is because the company seems to be focusing on diversity. And like I said at the beginning, there's a couple of elements that you've got to have within the organization. So you can't just have diversity without inclusion, right? And then when you miss the equity, giving people equitable opportunities and people feeling, psychologically safe in a sense of belonging, then it just kind of falls apart. So when an organization focuses, we're just gonna go out, we're just gonna hire all of these people, and they're diverse, and we're just gonna get them in the organization, but they're not really focusing on the other core elements or even on retention. Um, or having one person who's a diverse face of the company when they anything to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. Or we just hold all these amazing events and take these amazing pictures and stick them on social media. But we're not going to do any
Stop it. It's done.
policies.
Wasn't it great?
Yeah. No policies to support anyone who's underrepresented within our organization. So these are some of the things that I say around tokenism. And then microaggressions. This one, I hope I just don't like the term microaggressions because while some might be small, they're really sort of things that have a massive impact on people daily. And it can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what background you are when it comes to microaggressions. And I think it's just about being mindful of that if you're a leader and noticing and kind of responding to that and being more aware. The one that sticks out to me when I think about microaggressions, an example is yeah, Jasmine Crockett and about her eyelashes. That was a very good one. Um,
Hmm.
Again, you shouldn't happen to experience that within an organization or workplace, but that was an example that I can think of recently, especially when it was released to America in that oversight committee meeting. So when we think about the impact on people, the impact on the team, you've got bias that could impact the recruitment decisions and influence how, you're hiring people and retaining people. Then you've got, the tokenism where you're not really committing to diversity, but you're acting like you are externally. Then you've got the microaggressions and which impacts people all the time, like in sort of ways. So I think the goal is we shouldn't get to a point where we're fearful of communicating with each other, but it's about how we're creating cultures where people can thrive. And it's not going to happen overnight. And I think some of the things I talked about is, being aware of biases, having some training in place to mitigate some of that, having a real, authentic purpose to support diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Not it's just feel good. This looks great. We're just going to, have some lovely pictures of people. But really, if you're intentional about it, you're authentic in the journey, you would be thinking about what policies can support people. What are the benefits of me having an amazing team that is diverse and that team feels safe to work here? So I think those are the core things that I see. But I try to keep it as short as I can because there's quite a lot there.
Oh, it's a large question, and I think you did a very good job of answering it. I mean, it really does highlight one of the things I heard a couple days ago, in a lot of it in regards to the last cliff for a lot of women in high positions, is that you should be wary of being the token or realizing that you're the token because tokens get spent.
Yeah.
And if you are somebody who was brought in to give the appearance, that might be all you're really allowed to do. And that's like the least impactful part of diversity is the visual aspect of it. So I think, you have several amazing points. We've
There's
only got
also a
time for
flip
one more
side.
question.
Sorry, there's only a flip side to that at my fourth time. But I would also say if you're the token or you realize you are, there might be a way to think about, okay, well, how can I kind of use that to kind of make that change and difference within the organization as well, if you find
Oh,
yourself
heck
in
yeah.
that.
Yeah. Use whatever place of power that you have to make the moves that you can't. Like every drop makes a puddle, and we're not going to do this on our own. So it's definitely something we all need to keep pushing the envelope forward with. So I think, yeah, excellent point. Thank you. Okay, we got time for one more question, and then I'm gonna have to wrap up. But how can leaders really embed inclusion into everyday decision making so that it can help, strengthen the culture, the accountability, have that long-term impact that you want, that we, as discussed, you can't get just from, collecting a full deck of people who don't look like other people that already work for your organization. So what do you recommend? How can leaders think about this?
I think the diversity inclusion is a spectrum of experiences, right? It goes beyond gender, culture, accessibility. There's a lot to unpack, right? When an organization starts off with, oh, we are perfect, right? It's not a good place to start. So maybe I always try to say a perfect non-discriminatory organization is absolutely impossible to have, right? And that's even some of the biggest, best global organizations that I've worked in. And as the world evolves, there's no way any organization is going to completely get it right. So I think what they really should be thinking about is, like we talked about, how do we be more intentional about inclusion? Because we know the benefits it's going to give to us, right? How do we start to think of inclusion as this is a core business driver for us? Once you start to change that mindset and try to think about what are the little steps we can take, you're thinking about hiring, promotions, your like strategy, what's missing from our decision. Are we encouraging our teams to come together to co-create solutions? Are we thinking about inclusive practices? Are we measuring impact over time? Are we driving what we class as sustainable performance? Are we listening to the diverse voices within our team? Are we creating space, right? It's not about, we talked about there's a bit of lip service or buzzwords or performative DEI. How are we taking concrete actions to ensure every voice in the organization is being heard, they're respected, they're valued, and they are fundamental principles that we drive us as an organization. And I think having that responsibility to champion diversity inclusion, create environments that everybody can thrive, it's really helpful. And I don't know if I've got time. I was just going to touch on the backlash because I think it is important. it's impacted a number of organizations. And I think that the things that we talked about where some organization can sit in the space of, we don't have a diversity problem here, or not my problem to solve, where there might be inequality, but it's not my problem, or we can't lower the bar to attract diversity. Why don't we hire the best person for the jobs? These are the little things that you get thrown around when it comes to some of the backlash that it's facing. And the
Yeah.
second part of the backlash is even people saying, "Oh, I don't think this company has got thinking about inclusive practices, like not in a performative way." So I think what leaders can do is taking an evidence-based approach, right? So you're making sure you're conducting regular engagement surveys, you're monitoring and tracking your progress, you're authentic in your journey, where you're feeling that my leaders knows they know is important, right? To acknowledge challenges and that there's ongoing work there. The role model and inclusion, you've got allyship, you've got inclusive leadership training, and you're recognizing talent, right? I think the whole concept is always going to remain because as long as there's any inequity, then an organization needs to be intentional about how you actually include people and kind of create an inclusive environment. Sorry, I hope I haven't gone out of time because I could just go on.
No, we are like right at it, but I'm like hanging on your every word. So I'm loving this. Um, Nora, I just want to say thank you so much. Truly, it's been a wonderful opportunity to chat with you again. I really hope we get to do this again in the future. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you, Meg, and thank you so much. I hope to see you again soon.